morning, everybody. Happy Monday. We have an amazing show for everybody today. What do we have, Krystal?
Indeed we do. There was a hell of a lot happening this weekend. Your tax dollars going to foreign wars. How excited are we about the bipartisan consensus that always seems to win in Washington? We've got some big news out of Israel. A couple things to look at. So the U.S. vetoing a Palestinian statehood resolution at the UN Security Council. We'll talk about the fallout from that. Also, Bibi apparently worried about potential arrest warrants coming from the International Criminal Court. So lots to break down there. We've also got some Trump news for you. A man self-immolated outside of his trial last week, but also opening statements start today. So a lot to break down there. Also some interesting conspiracy theories about what Trump has been up to while he's in the courtroom. Don't want to miss that one.
You're going to enjoy it.
Yeah. Huge victory for labor and for the United Auto Workers in particular. A resounding win at that Volkswagen plant in Tennessee. We'll break down what happened and what it means going forward. Got a couple of highlights for you from Tucker on with Joe Rogan. Going in on a few people and floating a few interesting theories.
Yeah, we'll discuss.
We've got thoughts on.
Yes.
And we've got a great guest on today, Prem Thakur, to talk about these protests happening specifically at Colombia that have become a big subject of national attention and debate. The president issuing a statement, Eric Adams issuing a statement. So we will tell you what the hell is going on there as well.
Yes, of course, that is the most important story in the country to our elites. But of course, that makes sense, especially with where we're going to begin our show today. Before we get to that, we've teased it a million times, and it is coming. We've got a big announcement that's coming soon from Emily and Ryan. You'll hear it first from them, but of course, if you want to help us out, all of us, breakingpoints.com, to be able to support some of that work. It's a big announcement that our premium subscribers are going to know about first, and they're also going to get exclusive access to whatever that future content may be. So just put that out there. So if you want to go ahead and sign up, we would welcome you to do so. But as we teased everybody on Thursday, a big vote was happening in the House of Representatives after Speaker Mike Johnson stabbed his own party in the back and decided to pass aid for Ukraine and for Israel using an unprecedented parliamentary maneuver, which basically allowed Democrats to vote for the Ukraine aid, Republicans to vote for the Israel aid, package it all together and create the greatest uniparty war funding that Washington has ever seen. And they did not disappoint in their display of dual loyalty. Let's go and put this up there on the screen. As the votes passed through the House of Representatives that officially got the bill across the aisle, you see Ukraine flags that are all across, chanting Slava Ukraine. You've got not American flag in sight there, by the way, on the flag of the House of Representatives. And don't worry, there are Israel flags on the other side too, so don't act like they didn't exist there. They're being passed out. Well, some representatives, Krystal, were actually FaceTiming Ukrainian soldiers who were on the front line just to say, you're welcome. We finally have accomplished it for you. And I guess the main takeaway that we can have from this is just the absolute level of dedication that these people have to moving heaven and earth to spend hundreds of billions for foreign nations so that they can conduct war. They've never done it once for the rest of us. But for this, of course, we can break precedent. There's no talk of filibuster or any of that other stuff.
Yeah.
Whenever it comes to this, $60-some billion from Ukraine, $26 billion for Israel. The vast majority of that being fed entirely to the military-industrial complex and to these nations with a complete blank check that's given to them.
Which is something they weirdly are like bragging about.
They think
like
it's
that's
cool.
a selling point. Like, don't worry, a lot of this money is going to go to the military-industrial complex. Don't you feel great about that? Now, listen. When it comes to you getting health care, you getting higher wages, when it comes to, making sure seniors can live on Social Security or people can afford childcare, or you've got universal access to preschool, or people could even just take paid leave if they, are having a baby. None of that. We can't get that done. We don't have the money, et cetera, et cetera. It's too difficult. It's too hard. But they will move heaven and earth to make sure that we continue funding wars. Whether it is, listen, with regard to Ukraine, I'm incredibly sympathetic to the Ukrainians. I think it was wrong and illegal, the Russian invasion. But we have to be real about the fact at this point that, number one, we're the ones who have dragged them to continue this war by thwarting diplomatic negotiations. Number two, there is no end in sight. There's not even a fig leaf of, hey, once we give them this money, then victory's around the corner. There's none of that. And number three, their own people at this point, the military-age men of their own population, do not want to fight. So we know the reports about people who are disabled, who are too old, who have mental disabilities being pulled off the street and sent to the front lines. And we're celebrating, putting the guns in their hands. We're celebrating. With regard to Israel, look at what has happened here. I mean, according to Euromed Human Rights Monitor, over 40,000 Palestinians killed. There was just, we're going to cover this later, two strikes on Rafah killed 22 people, 18 of them children. The entire Gaza Strip is annihilated, aid workers slaughtered, and we're still shipping them weapons as if none of this has happened. It's outrageous. I mean, I'm not surprised by it. I knew at some point they would figure out how to get this done. But, you know, if you want a glimpse into why politicians like Mike Johnson, he's always been fervently Zionist. I mean, the first thing he did when he became speaker, remember, was call Netanyahu and pass some anti-Semitism resolution. That one's not surprising, but he did a 180 on Ukraine. And put this next piece up on the screen. You wonder why? Because this is the media treatment you get. By passing Ukraine aid, Johnson became an unlikely Churchill. There is nothing but plaudits from the media for funding wars over and over and over again. Remember how Joe Biden, one good thing Joe Biden did withdrawing from Afghanistan, relentlessly trashed for that, even though it was overwhelmingly what the American people wanted. Here, Johnson going against, especially on Israel, and we'll show you the polling in a little bit, what the American people wanting. And suddenly all their vaunted concern for democracy evaporates when it comes to sending your hard-earned tax dollars into these conflicts to slaughter more children.
Yeah, I will be honest, this is the blackest pill that I've had in a really long time. After all the work that we've done here on the show, that the media and others, even they have been forced to admit the failure of the cause in Ukraine, they still decide to do $60 billion. What? So that, and this is the worst part, Krystal, this $60 billion will have a single objective. It will prolong this war for about one more year. According to the funding statistics that have come out, this will buy them approximately half of their failed counteroffensive. The net result of this is going to be probably a bunch of 50 to 70-year-old Ukrainian men who are going to lose limbs. Now, after that period dries up and they continue to fail on the front line and continue to have a 5-to-1 artillery disadvantage against the Russians, and the Russians continue to recoup all of the losses that they've already had in their military, revamp their military-industrial complex, have their economy grow, according to the IMF, a nonpartisan source, more than the entire European Union. After all of that is now clear a year from now, what do you think is going to happen? $60 billion will pale to what they are going to ask for now to rebuild Ukraine. Somebody's got to pay for all those limbs and for all those dead guys and for pensions and for whatever survives, whatever rump of the Ukrainian state does eventually make it out of here. We will then be on the hook for that. It never ends. This has no purpose. Now, if they were using this for defensive purposes, maybe, okay? Maybe it would have some sort of justification. But Zelensky does not commit to defense. Instead, he says this will enable us for victory. How many times do we have to hear these fake cries of victory? They failed in the counteroffensive. They have one of the most tactically inefficient and incompetent armies in the world. They have not able to use NATO tactics. Their weapons have made no difference whenever they were flushed. Their lead general, the head that they replaced their military commander with, his nickname is the Butcher. Not by the Russians, the people you would want to nickname the Butcher, by his own people. That's what they call him, the Butcher, because his entire strategy is just to throw as many people into this as possible. On Israel as well. I mean, even zoom out just from Israel's own actions. What have they done to make America more safe? Nothing. Invite more attacks on American service members.
Oh,
hundreds.
World War III.
Multiple are dead now as a result of our posture in the Middle East in retaliation for Israel's actions. Tens of billions of dollars that has been spent deploying U.S. military and naval assets. The defense against the Iranian attack alone cost the United States $1.3 billion in missile interceptors, and including missiles that cost some $24 million each, deployed by the U.S. to shoot down Iranian ballistic missiles, only to then invite an Israeli strike on Iran with God knows what the hell is going to happen in retaliation. So now what? You know, where are we? Why are we all paying for this to continue whenever we clearly could put an end to it if we wanted. So in both cases, you have wars that are making America less safe, that are bad for the populations, I would say both of Israel and for the population of Gaza, which I could easily make that case. The only people who are benefiting are the war manufacturers and the religion of the dual loyalty leadership class in this country. And I'm going to continue to use that.
Really triple loyalty, I think, in this case.
Well, what I would say is this, is that this is, you know, Trump, I went back to read, about 7 years ago he gave a speech, which clearly didn't believe, but it was a good speech nonetheless. It was his first foreign policy speech. And he has a line in there, which has always stuck with me, is that we will not worship longer at the false song of globalism. And that's when I see Ukrainian and Israeli flags being waved on the floor of the United States House of Representatives, when I see our Speaker of the House with 2 flags on his lapel, neither of which are the United States flag, but are 2 nations of which he just broke parliamentary procedure to spend hundreds of billions of dollars to. I can say nothing else than these people are loyal to a foreign government and not to our own. Now, Speaker Johnson, actually loyal to even higher authority than any nation, gave a justification in particular for some of this Israel aid on Newsmax. Let's take a listen.
Israel is a critical ally of ours, and I think most people understand the necessity of this funding. They're fighting for their very existence. They're the only stable democracy in the Middle East. I mean, of course, for those of us who are believers, it's a biblical admonition to stand with Israel. We will, and they will prevail as long as they're with them. And this is an important, very important symbolic gesture and a very important replenishment of their stockpiles, for example, of the Iron Dome. The reason they shot down all those drones and missiles in the last attack by Iran is because we assisted with that. I think the American people understand the importance of that.
Did you guys hear that line? For those of us who are believers, it is a biblical admonition to stand with Israel. It's like, well, if it's in the Bible, I guess there ain't getting around that. This is literally out of his mouth. The Speaker of the House of Representatives, the third in line for the American presidency, who believes that he is like, what, some hand of God. And let's not let this go either. John Hagee, who is the pastor who leads the 10 million Christian group, for Israel, was here in Washington just 2 days before and met with Speaker Johnson, probably to give him the language that he needs. And all of the reporting that we've gotten since, Krystal, is that the way that Johnson arrived at this is that he prayed on it. And listen, I'm not going to put down people who are religious and who pray. I think that's fine. But I would just simply ask that in the United States of America, a country with separation of church and state, that we arrive at policy decisions through reason, intellect, and possible debate rather than from biblical admonition.
Yeah.
My simple request.
Well, what this means is that it actually does not matter to Speaker Johnson what Israel does. Doesn't matter.
Right.
Doesn't matter whether it is truly a genocide. Doesn't matter whether there are war crimes. Doesn't matter whether it's good for America's interest or not. It doesn't matter. Because for him, it's a, quote, biblical admonition. You can't argue. I mean, there's no debate with that. That's just like, no, my fervent, ideological, unshakable belief is that God requires me to support Israel no matter the cost or consequence for Palestinians, no matter the cost or consequence for Americans. And this is one of the most powerful people in the country, if not the world, who is making policy decisions this way. Like, what can you even say about that? And you see how motivating this is among a certain segment of the Republican base as well. I keep talking about this, but I think it's so extraordinarily revealing. When there was polling asking by religious demographic group, how do you feel about the Netanyahu government? Not even about Israel or what's happening in Gaza, but just the Netanyahu government. The religious group that gave him the highest approval ratings was not Jewish people. It was by a mile white evangelical Christians. So that's what's motivating him with regard to Israel. I think that's an important part of how he ended up flipping on a dime with regard to Ukraine as well, because he realized in order to fulfill his biblical admonition to support Israel no matter what, he was also going to have to play ball with Democrats on the Ukraine bill. Let's not forget the way he also flipped on a dime with regard to making sure Americans can continue to be surveilled. And, the other piece of this, Saagar, is that he talks about, in addition to his religious faith, He also talks about how the Intel committee, how the intelligence agency, how they really, they really got to him, what they had to say to him. And we've seen this a lot of times. You saw this with Trump as well. It's so easy to roll these people. It's so easy to scare them and manipulate them. We saw the same thing with Obama, too, by the way, when he was president of the United States, especially when you have someone who is inexperienced, who hasn't been around the block, who hasn't seen these tactics, which are rolled out by, yes, the deep state over and over and over again. They get rolled so easily, especially when his, religious belief also leads him in the direction of wanting to pass both the Israel aid and the Ukrainian aid in order to make sure that Israel is getting their dollars to keep bombing babies.
If you guys want an inside view into this, there's a book called Obama's Wars by Bob Woodward. It was written back in 2010. It's specifically about the decision that Obama was forced into to do the surge in Afghanistan, the way that David Petraeus, Stan McChrystal, Mike Mullen, and the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the U.S. intelligence community, the CIA, basically set Obama up for complete failure if he didn't then promise to a surge. And we had a chance at that time to actually pull out of the country, and instead we escalated for that. I highly recommend people read that because that is mechanically the exact way that you, even as the president, can get set up by these people. And Tucker has some thoughts on that too, by the way, which we'll get to a little bit in the show. But we would be remiss if we didn't highlight a little bit of how, again, we came to this decision. Let's put this, please, up there on the screen from CNN. They confirm it. Quote, he was torn between having to save his job and do the right thing. Congressman Mike McCall said, quote, he prayed over it. Prayer, apparently the way that Speaker Johnson arrived at this. Now, let's take a look at the poll, shall we? In the ostensible way that we live in a democracy. Let's go and put this up there on the screen. Here's what we've got on Israel. This is April 12th, 2024. Should more weapons and supplies to Israel? Should we send more? Should or should not? All. Should, 40. 60, should not. Democrats, 32% say should, 68% say should not. Independents, 38% say should, 64% say not.
Not
Republicans,
that much difference,
no,
actually.
not that much difference at all. Republicans, 55% say should, 45% say they should not. And what's also important to keep in mind for that plus 10 is that even nearly half of the Republicans are saying there, we shouldn't send more weapons to Israel. Now, in terms of the look at the vote, where we actually have the amount of military aid that's being sent to Israel, you have some plus 64 members who actually end up voting then for the actual military aid to Israel, in no way representative of their base. And the exact same thing holds true for Ukraine. Let's go ahead and put this up there on the screen. And what do we find? This is just from the latest poll that happened on Ukraine, where we see amongst U.S. adults, only 27% say that we are doing too little for Ukraine. 33% say, quote, about the right amount, and that was prior to the package. And too much is now the majoritarian position at 37. Only Democrats, 44%, say we're doing too little. Amongst Republicans, 14% say we're doing too little. 29% say about the right, about right, and 55% say that we are doing too much. So as we can all see very clearly, the Republicans, where a majority of the Republicans in the House of Representatives voted against Ukraine aid, were rolled by their speaker to work with Democrats. And basically here, Democrats just are much more willing, I guess, to ignore some of their base on that question, but then work also with Republicans who overwhelmingly voted for the Israel aid. So you have two parties basically beholden to two foreign nations, loyalty, tri-loyalty, I guess, across all of this, and work in tandem to make this push to the United States Senate, where tomorrow, on Tuesday, it's almost certainly going to become the law of the land, and they're already salivating at the Pentagon over shipping long-range weapons to Ukraine. Long-range weapons in U.S. stockpiles. Long-range weapons which will be used to strike inside of Russian territory or the Crimean Bridge. And who do you think is going to bear the cost of that? It's the United States of America, if Ukraine gets itself in a bigger conflagration.
So let me ask you a question, Saagar, because I am a little conflicted about how to think about this. So as you just pointed out, the Democratic base is, first of all, they've been overwhelmingly in favor of a ceasefire. A majority of Joe Biden voters say, yes, this is a genocide, and they are overwhelmingly opposed to shipping more military aid to Israel. Certainly the numbers of Democrats in the House that voted against this Israel aid package do not reflect the sentiment of the base. So that's on the one hand. On the other hand, compared to previous military aid to Israel, 37 Democrats specifically, voting against it is a significantly higher number than previously. I think the last time there was a question about like replenishing Iron Dome, sending $1 billion for that, it was like 9 Democrats who voted against it. So how do you look at that? And especially when there were, it wasn't just like AOC and Ilhan Omar. You had a number of longtime members who are in leadership positions who even voted against that. So how do you think about that?
I think exactly what I do on Ukraine. Doesn't matter. The majority of Republicans, the party in power in the House of Representatives, voted against aid to Ukraine. Didn't matter. The speaker wanted it, so did the Democrats. It doesn't, we could have a majority of Democrats who are going to oppose Israel, and they would still find a way to make it pass. That's what you should take away from this, is like, party politics does not matter when the uniparty actually wants something. It only matters whenever we're talking about mortgage rates or housing assistance or basically anything that would actually help any of us. If they wanted to get it done, they will get it done. The majority of the American public thinks we're doing too much for Ukraine. And that was before the $60 billion that we just shipped over there. The vast majority of Republicans say and oppose this military aid for Ukraine. It doesn't matter. Trump can bamboozle them, dangle a little stop the steal in front of their eyes, and they'll forget whenever it comes to Election Day. Aside from some young people, most people are going to vote on abortion, and most people are not going to remember that, are not going to remember this whenever it comes time to the ballot box. I already saw a clip of AOC, I think, with Mehdi Hassan, and he was like, what do you say to somebody who is not going to vote for Biden? And she's like, well, I am on the side of democracy, not only here, but across the world. I'm like, okay, all right, cool. I mean, there's just nothing that will ever happen where you're not going to vote against the Republicans. Most Republicans vote exactly the same way. On the margins, there may be some, but at the end of the day, they can they don't even stab us in the back. They stab us in the front, and they twist the knife, and then they give the knife over to us, and then they accuse you of being the one who's in the wrong, and they're like, why are you committing violence when all this is happening? Which is why you have to go and vote in order to bandage yourself up.
I do think there's a bit of a warning sign here, though, for Israel, on the other hand, because, there used to be this total lockstep uniformity that no one broke from. And that, anyone who did knew that was going to be the end of their political career. And even with AIPAC, the Israel lobby, threatening to spend $100 million in primaries against anyone who even thinks of dissenting, even with that kind of firepower trained at now, all 37 of these individuals who voted against this funding, they still were willing to do it and still feel like they'll be able to hold on to their seats, and that, that it was worth paying that price, or that there's enough energy on the other side to make up for the fact that they could have that money spent against them. So I do think, as disheartening and depressing as this is, there is a bit of a warning sign here for Israel in that they just don't have quite the lockstep control that they once did.
I don't disagree. I think 25, 30 years from now, you're right. Again, I just point to Ukraine. You can lose the public, and they'll still get it done for you. So in the near term, folks, sign up. Because if it's up to these people, we would die for foreign countries before we would ever die, for any of our own interests. And that is the clearest takeaway that we have.
Hey guys, if you like that video, go to breakingpoints.com, become a premium subscriber, and help us build the best independent media organization on the planet.
That's right. We're subscriber funded. We're building something new. We want to replace these failing mainstream media organizations.
So again, to subscribe, it's breakingpoints.com.